Bruchim habayim, everyone. Can I please ask everyone to please take your seats, A, so we can begin on time, and B, so we know if we need to bring more seats in. We have a delightfully and hopefully not problematically filled room. And we'll begin in just a few moments.
Here he comes. Tell President Obama that.
Good evening, Erev Tov, Chodesh Tov, everybody. Welcome to what is a very, very exciting evening. On behalf of the Rabbinical Assembly of the New York Jewish Week, the leadership of Park Avenue Synagogue, Bruchim Habayim, it's an honor to play host, to be the Tampa to this event.
That's not funny.
In the company of so many people committed to the vitality of the Jewish people. And it's humbling to welcome so many colleagues, so many teachers, so many honored rabbis and friends. I look around and see all the rabbis whose sermons I've stolen over the years, and it's really humbling. And of course to Rabbi Schonfeld, and Rabbi Martin Cohen, and Rabbi Michael Katz, and our dear shared friend Gary Rosenblatt of the Jewish Week. None of this would be possible, of course, without Rabbi Jan Kaufman of the RA, Thea Wieseltier of the Jewish Week, and of course our own Liz Offenbach, the Director of Programming here at Park Avenue. This evening represents the possibilities that when it comes to important Jewish conversations, when we all work together, the sum is actually greater than the parts. Reflecting on its location, the shared leadership of Park Avenue and JTS and the conservative movement, we're honored to play host. Indeed, the pedigree of this evening can be traced directly to my esteemed predecessor here this evening, Rabbi David Lincoln. Your support for this project, the support of Park Avenue leaders like Joan and Paul Schreiber, Jeffrey Loria, Bernard Goldberg, Joel and Lillian Cohen, Dr. Michael Kogan, who collectively exemplify what it means to be a flagship institution for the movement. And I want to publicly acknowledge Rabbi Lincoln for his leadership. And especially on an evening like this, we know that it wouldn't have been possible without the generous and inspired vision of our own Carol and Gershon Kext, many of the contributors trained at the seminary that Gershon led for so many years. And so from multiple vantage points, this evening would not have been possible without their leadership. The history of the Jewish people can be told in a variety of ways, by way of our connection to the land, our relationship to our host culture, the presence or hiddenness of God, as many histories as there are historians of our people. This evening turns our attention to an unexpected marker of our people's vitality, the act of codification of Jewish law. From the very giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai to Ezra's reading of the law upon the return from the exile, the declaration of Jewish law says something very important about who we are and where we are. The Mishnah of the year 200, the rabbinic attempt to apply Jewish law at a time of crisis and upheaval, during the Middle Ages, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and then the Shulchan Aruch of Joseph Caro, along with the glosses of Moses Isserlis, all signaling moments of anxiety, but also affirmation and opportunity. The process of writing down Jewish law is a continual process of renewal as our people have gone from its highs to lows. And the release this evening of The Observant Life, a publication some 10 years in the making, is in this sense an altogether momentous event for our people. Some quarter century since the publication of Isaac Klein's Guide to Jewish Religious Practice, The Observant Life provides an opportunity not just to appreciate the religious leadership of the conservative movement, but to appreciate the anxieties and aspirations of our people at this juncture. Tonight is an evening signaling continuity, it's an evening signaling renewal, and most of all, it's an evening shedding light on our people's continued journey on the pathway, the halakha, seeking the divine presence. It's a great honor for me to welcome Martin Cohen, the senior editor, who will, is that correct? Is that Martin's next? Who will share remarks on this evening's exciting publication. Martin?
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm going to limit my remarks simply to expressing gratitude first, because there's a very interesting program during the course of which lots of details about the history of our book and the impact that we hope it has on the Jewish people and specifically on our movement. All that will come out later in the evening. So first I'd like to just mention some thanks. All of you can imagine just by looking at this book that it was an enormous undertaking, and it could not possibly have been accomplished without the help of an almost countless number of people who pitched in, some of whom maximally, some of whom just for a little bit, all of whom together gathered their strength to make this book happen. I have first to mention the authors. The authors of our book are 30 different rabbis. They are all different in many ways, but they're also all very similar in many ways. And the way in which they are similar is that they are deeply and passionately devoted to the study of halakha and to the translation of our traditional values into the context of daily life. At the beginning, when we were first discussing what kind of book we hope to create, I hope to create among them a sense of shared purpose and of a common ideal towards which we would work together. But I have to say that although the original idea was for me to share that with them, it was in the end they who shared it with me. And so I begin this evening by thanking all of our authors, those who are standing here today with us and those who are not standing here today, all of them from all over the world and specifically all parts of our country. The New York people are here this evening, almost every one of them. In fact, I believe every one of them from the New York region. The rest could not come, but in the end I feel deeply grateful to them all. I also want to mention the exceptional support that we received from the Rabbinical Assembly in the course of the many years that we undertook this. First from Joel Myers, then from his successor, Julie Schonfeld, the Executive Vice President of the Rabbinical Assembly. Jan Kaufman, who was specifically responsible on the seminary staff for ushering this book into print, and without whose effort it is unimaginable that the book would ever have been published. Amy Gottlieb, who was the Director of Publications for 6 out of the 9 years that we worked on this project. And many, many others as well on the Rabbinical Assembly staff who assisted in various ways in the making of this book. All of you know that aside from a huge amount of sweat, there also has to go into the making of a book like this a huge amount of money. It is a big undertaking. Books like this do not fall out of the sky, and that's just as good, because a book like this could kill you if it actually fell out of the sky onto your head. It is everything, as you all know from every other context of daily life, costs a fortune. But we were very, very lucky. But actually, before I turn to that specific aspect of our evening, I want to say a few words about my co-editor, Michael Katz. Rabbi Katz, the rabbi of Temple Beth Torah in Westbury, New York, was with me from the very beginning. He was at the first meeting with Joel Myers when we first tried to flesh out the concept. He remained involved throughout the entire process until this very afternoon when he addressed the leadership conference of conservative Judaism and brought them up to speed and explained to them what the book was all about. Rabbi Katz served as the associate editor of the volume, but more than that, he served as my friend and as the friend of all the authors who were involved, a liaison in many different ways to all sorts of different groups. And although it was my privilege to serve as senior editor for the volume, I certainly wish to say publicly and with the greatest warmth and all heart that the book could not have been created without Rabbi Katz's work. Rabbi Katz was also responsible for a generous gift which came from the Rabbi's Discretionary Fund of Temple Beth Torah, and also for a parallel gift that came from the Keren Leah David Charity Fund, which is administered by the Rabbi of Temple Beth Torah, Rabbi Katz. As Rabbi Cosgrove mentioned before, during the course of the years that we worked on this project, Rabbi David Lincoln, our esteemed colleague and the Rabbi Emeritus of this congregation that is hosting us this evening, retired from the rabbinate. And a number of members of his congregation, seeking a way to honor him on the occasion of his retirement, hit on the thought of subventing a work that would represent the degree to which Rabbi Lincoln himself has devoted his life to teaching Torah and to making of this congregation a synagogue worthy of its place as a flagship synagogue of our movement in Manhattan and New York, and indeed one of the congregations of note in the entire conservative world. Those people's names were mentioned to you just before, but I'd like to say them again. They are Bernard Goldberg, Joel and Lillian Cohen, Dr. Michael Kogan, Jeffrey Loria, Paul and Joan Schreiber, and Gershon and Carol Kext. By making their gift to this project in honor of Rabbi Lincoln on the occasion of his retirement, they truly said more profoundly than they ever could have in just words what Rabbi Lincoln's work meant to them, and I can certainly assure you what his work means to all of us in the Rabbinical Assembly. So I make my second point of this evening in that regard by asking you all to join me in honoring Rabbi Lincoln on the occasion of his retirement and wishing him well in the future. And finally, I wish to mention two of the people on that other list, Gershon and Carol Kext. It is unimaginable that our book could have been published without their munificence and without their generosity. Gershon and Carol Kext have had a role to play in so many different operations undertaken by the Rabbinical Assembly and the conservative movement as a whole, subventing the costs of so many different books and different types of publication. But their gift, their interest, their willingness to support the observant life was really without parallel. To say that it would not have been published without their support is to say nothing at all. It could not have reached the first stage of its existence without the support of generous Mycenases like themselves. I cannot find the words really to express the degree of gratitude that I personally, that the other members of our editorial staff, that the senior staff of the Rabbinical Assembly, and that all of my authors feel for the Kexts and for their generosity. Without the support of people like that, the work of people who wrote for this book would never see the light of day. And although this endless pas de deux that exists between donors and writers in the making of Jewish books has always existed and I suppose always will exist, it really behooves us to pause before we say anything else at all about our book, to pay homage to those who selflessly and generously supported its publication in a way that was really truly remarkable. So to the Kexts, I say thank you, and to all of you also, I say thank you for coming this evening, and I hope you enjoy our evening.
Okay. I'm Gary Rosenblatt. I'm editor and publisher of the Jewish Week in New York, and I am here with my notebook and pen in hand. That's in case I say anything interesting tonight, I can stop and write it down. But the Jewish Week is proud to co-sponsor this event and with the Rabbinical Assembly, and to draw more public attention to the Observant life, which is quite a remarkable book. And I'm just wondering how many of you who didn't write the book, who are here, have seen it or had a chance to. Okay, good. And I think there will be copies on sale and signed later this evening.
Should I just
So
insert
I think you will also appreciate. Thanks.
Gary, just before we do,
Yeah.
I realize that as a host I neglected to share some important information, which is the pacing of the evening, which is, I apologize for that oversight. We will sit here in dialogue as a panel for approximately 30 minutes or so, and then there will be breakout sessions immediately to follow where the authors themselves will, and Rabbi Schonfeld will set that moment up when we're done with the dialogue.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to just explain
sorry.
that. That's okay. This is a book that deals with the real world and with goes beyond rituals and synagogue life, and really takes you to family issues, business issues, legal issues, deals with the environment, modern technology, and deals, it's sort of where halacha meets the road in a way. And I wanted to also make clear that we will conclude this evening, both the first and second part of the program, by just around 8:30. For those of you interested in any other events that are taking place in the world tonight, either on the baseball field or between political candidates, you'll be fine. So, and just to add to what Rabbi Cosgrove said about the first part of this dialogue, we would like to make this as conversational as possible, and not simply a Q&A. So I encourage the three of you to engage with each other in responding. And so just a word about the Jewish Week and why is a newspaper co-sponsoring a program like this. And it's true we are a media group with a print edition and a website, but we also sponsor a number of projects, community projects for young people, and we try and walk a delicate line of both covering the Jewish community and being a part of and supporting the Jewish community, and I appreciate your support. So since there are so many rabbis in the room, I just want to tell a quick story. My late father was a rabbi of a congregation in Annapolis, Maryland for 40 years. And one of the stories he liked to tell is about a very young rabbi, his first pulpit, his first week in a small town in New England, and one of the pioneers of the community, somebody in his 90s, passes away, and he's called upon to officiate at the funeral. So he gets up at the synagogue and he says, "As you know, I've only been in town a couple of days. I really didn't know this gentleman, and I think it would be really nice if somebody from the community would come up and eulogize him." Nothing. So he repeats this request. Nothing. Finally, he says, "We're not going to leave here until somebody has something nice to say about the deceased." So finally, some older man in the back of the room gets up and says, "His brother, voice." So I see we're familiar with Jewish rituals already and how we relate to each other. So again, let me just very briefly introduce the panelists. They each have very impressive bios, but I'd rather you hear from them this evening than hear about them. So to my immediate right is Rabbi Martin Cohen, who's rabbi of the Shelter Rock Jewish Center in Roslyn, New York, and chairman of the editorial board of Quarterly Conservative Judaism, and as you know, senior editor of the Observant Life for the last almost 10 years. Okay. And still smiling. Next to him is Rabbi Julie Schonfeld, who's Executive Vice President of the Rabbinical Assembly, the International Association of Conservative Rabbis. And to her right is our host, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of Park Avenue Synagogue. And I think I should probably mention at this time, it's a good time to turn off your cell phones or any other electronic equipment. So if we can, let's start with you, Martin, in terms of how the book came to be. We know what an enormous project it was, but sort of what the thinking was going into it, and if that changed along the way, or if the product that came out is pretty much what you were hoping for.
Well, the background of the book is really, it has to do with Isaac Klein's book. Isaac Klein, as I'm sure everyone knows, is one of the premier halachists of our movement, a president of the Rabbinical Assembly, a revered figure. And he created a book called The Guide to Religious Practice, which became almost, I suppose, an instant classic. Still in print, still being given to countless bar mitzvah children, still a source book for all of us. Every rabbi in this room, including myself, has opened it countless times to look up details. But at a certain point, it became clear that it needed to be, at first we thought perhaps just updated, because many decisions had been made since it was published.
This was when, around the late 70s?
Unfortunately, Rabbi Klein didn't live to see the book published. He died just before its publication in 1979. The CJLS, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, has made many decisions since then. Life in conservative congregations has changed. The world itself has changed. And also, there was a growing feel among many of our colleagues, and I felt this way myself, that Rabbi Klein's book was focused solely on ritual matters, and that was creating a peculiar sense of what it meant to be an observant Jew. The notion that ritual was the definition, that if you said there's somebody observant, you were really asking if they kept kosher, or if they drove on Shabbos, or if they fasted on Yom Kippur, but not if they had any idea what the rules are that govern the workplace, their relationship with their employees, their relationship with their employer, with their parents, with their children, with their spouses, with their neighbors, with their co-workers, the way that the halakha dictated that a Jewish person should behave if impaneled on a jury, or if a Jewish person is a physician, or a patient of a physician. All of these areas where the halakha is so rich and so satisfying and so important in terms of the guidance it offers Jewish people seeking to live a life in accordance with the principles of the Torah. None of that was present in Rabbi Klein's book. It's not fair to criticize the man. That's not the book he wrote. His book was written primarily to serve as a handbook for rabbis. It was used in codes courses at JTS. But the notion that it was a guide to religious practice in its complexity and in its entirety was not quite correct. And so Joel Myers phoned me somewhere along the way in 2003 and asked if I would be interested in talking about what we could do to create a work that would supplement Rabbi Klein's book. Rabbi Katz was brought in right away. The two of us came to meet him, and we began to talk. We originally had the idea of publishing in 2 volumes. Then we changed the idea to 1. It morphed through various versions in our minds, and eventually we ended up with what we ended up with. The goal of the book was to frame Jewish observance in terms of real life, as you said in your opening remarks. We tried not to preach. The book is not about what would the ideal world would look like. This is not a City of God book like many authors have tried to write. This is a book about the actual world, a world in which people don't always behave well, in which neighbors are irritating and have noisy air conditioners, in which bosses are mean-spirited and harsh with their employees, in which people are discriminated against, in which, for all we say that the Torah holds up marriage as an ideal, a world in which many people are not married, a world in which, for all we endlessly discuss the various sexual mores as depicted in the Torah, in which there are all sorts of people that don't fit neatly into the apparent categories that everybody would find life that much simpler if they didn't exist. But they do exist, and there are lots of people in all of those categories. And our effort was to describe the world as it would be, as it should be, if people took the values of our faith and translated them into that kind of world, a world in which there are handicapped people, in which case you can't tell someone in a wheelchair that they can't use their wheelchair on Shabbat and come to shul, because they can't come to shul other than in a wheelchair. A world in which there are blind people, there are deaf people, there are all sorts of people who outside the traditional rubrics of halachic categorization. So our book is simply an effort to make wider the door, and then from there to make wider the barn, and to make sure that in that huge barn of observance there is a place for everybody. A place for everybody who wishes to embrace faith in the God of Israel through the medium of obedience to divine law, regardless of who that person actually is, married or single, male or female, older or younger, parent of children or just a child of parents. Regardless of the details, there should be room in that barn for every member of the House of Israel.
Right.
And that's what our book is attempting to show.
So Julie, you mentioned in the preface in the book about the title, The Observant Life. And you wrote, because we remain steadfast in belief that observing Judaism, that is practicing mitzvot, is the pathway to uncovering the full richness of Judaism in our lives. Sound familiar? Okay. That's good. So maybe talk a little bit about that title and that idea about the observant life.
Thank you, Gary. And interesting also to talk about the subtitle, which we gave quite a bit of thought to. We called the book The Observant Life, The Wisdom of Conservative Judaism for Contemporary Jews. And we chose the title very intentionally, and the subtitle. And of course, we live in a time, they tell us that this is a post-denominational age. So you shouldn't focus on something like the wisdom of conservative Judaism, right? We just want to talk about Judaism. And of course, the book is about Judaism, right? It is about that unique lens that conservative Judaism brings to it, which, Martin, you articulated right now so beautifully when you talk, for example, about, the person who can only come to shul if they come in an electric wheelchair, right? And Jeremy Kalmanovsky's chapter on single people and the sexual lives and personal lives as single people. How do we grapple with creating a synthesis for these identities, our Jewish identity, our Jewish aspirations, how Judaism's wisdom can inform our lives, and the extent to which we are fully living in the larger, broader society. And similarly, another word which sometimes is seen as not attracting people, to call it the observant life. And it's worth reflecting on from a couple of lenses. One is, I spoke on a panel recently with someone who happened to be a former president of a synagogue, a very knowledgeable, very dedicated person, and he spoke by contrast. He mentioned, unlike other religions that have a sense of putting intention in everything you do, Judaism doesn't focus on that. And I turned to him and I said, what is a bracha, right? We say a bracha before everything. Judaism is all about intention. And that is, of course, part of what the observant piece captures, right? It is this sense that we are bringing this higher set of moral values and moral aspirations to everything we do. But the other piece of observance, which we treasure and hold to in our movement, is the extent to which Jewish ritual acts are a pathway and a vehicle by which we literally transport ourselves and our Judaism to where we want to go. And I mention in the introduction, you can't pass a torch by talking about torches. So no matter how much we talk about our Jewish values and the conclusions they bring us to, if we don't have things that are concrete to signify that and to do, right, then it becomes all that much more difficult to be able to transmit Judaism from one generation to another. And surely we are not the first generation to struggle with this. And it has been our observance, the famous adage, did the Jews keep Shabbos or did Shabbos keep the Jews? Right? It has been these observances and these practices that have allowed us to give voice and expression to a system as comprehensive as what Martin referred to, that we're striving to.
Right. So Elliot, you play sort of a dual role here as a pulpit rabbi and congregational rabbi, and also somebody who is a thinker and writer on modern Jewish thought. So I wonder how you reflect on this book and sort of what it means for the moment for contemporary Jewry.
Thank you, Gary. I would build on Martin's comments, which it's interesting. I start my day teaching a class on modern Jewish thought here every Tuesday morning, and ending the day with a discussion on this book, where I think we're at a moment in Jewish identity that perhaps our predecessors did not imagine, in the following sense. If the promise or hope of the Haskalah, or one of the catchphrases, is that a person, a Jew, could be a Jew in the home, but a man, excuse the gender of it, I didn't make it up, a man in the street, right? A mensch in the street, in the sense that there would be a private sphere where ritual is observed, where Jewishness is observed, but when we enter into the public sphere, the world at large, that's a place where our primary commitments are our secular commitments of citizenship and otherwise. I think what Martin's comments bring into relief is that as important as probably about a third of this book is, in the sense that there are really beautiful essays on Shabbos observance, on the holidays, on how to bring Jewish ritual into our lives in really the most traditional and accessible terms, that this distinction between the public and private sphere is a very different world than we live in now. I think that presently there is an expectation amongst my congregants, and I imagine the congregants of my colleagues here, that Judaism has something to say about wars of choice and wars of necessity, that Judaism has something to say about palliative care, that Judaism has something to say about issues of sexuality or otherwise. And so not only is this distinction no longer there, but I think the Jew in the pew actually asks that their Jewishness informs the issues of the day. And so this distinction of sort of the traditionally framed ritual content of this book, or holiday observance or otherwise, and its voice on urgent issues facing contemporary society is very well timed.
I guess I'd ask, for any of you want to respond about how you'd like to see the book used. Do you see it as essentially a reference book that's going to be on people's shelves, or a book that people read, or do you foresee adult education classes around it, or just?
Martin, just when I edited another volume earlier, and I was asked in a panel, who's the intended audience of this book? And I answered it, I said, for those with credit cards. So, that's one audience.
The intended audience of this book is my personal fantasy. I live a little bit in the dream world all the time, but my personal fantasy is that a copy of this book will find its way into the home of every individual affiliated with a conservative synagogue or Masorti congregation everywhere in the world, in Israel, in Europe, all across North America. Since I'm talking about fantasy world, I would hope that we can produce a Spanish language edition for Latin America. It would be a fabulous accomplishment if we could bring this book out in Hebrew. I feel that one of the things that one of our authors, my colleagues, and one of my very closest friends, Rabbi Michael Gretz in Israel, used to talk about the morbid fear of self-definition that stalks our movement at every turn. And everyone chuckles when they hear it, but it's not as funny as it sounds. But I would say that with the publication of The Observant Life, we have surely put that to bed. Whatever else they can say about us, they cannot say that we forbear to define ourselves. And now the challenge is to take this effort, this huge 935-page effort to say what we are, and to bring it to the Jewish world and to say this is not what you thought. Perhaps this is different than what you may have been thinking we're all about. And I'd like to say that to our colleagues in the Orthodox world and in the Reform world and the unaffiliated world, but I'd especially like to say it to the affiliated families of our conservative congregations. This book, every book like this, is by definition a snapshot. This is not where we'll be in 5 years. It isn't where we were 20 years ago. It's where we were, for better or worse, on May 1st, 2012, the date of our publication. That's not good or bad. It's just how it must be. But when you look at a photograph album and you see a portrait of someone, it's a portrait of that person at that moment, and you connect to that idea and you say, this is who I am right now, and this is who we are right now. And I'd like people to embrace that, to enjoy it, to read it, to celebrate it, to allow themselves to take issue with it, and I'd like it to become the playing field on which we wrangle around for the next few years, trying to refine this vision to an even greater degree. That's what it means to me.
As long as we're on the subject of fantasies of how the book will be used, I would like to suggest that a wonderful way to utilize the book is to get a couple of friends, a few people you find interesting, has 40 chapters of really eminently worthwhile topics, every one of them. Journalistic ethics, what is the meaning of modesty in contemporary society, various studies of personal relationships, relationships between neighbors, really a book club format. And actually we are soon to be releasing 2 study guide formats from our office. One is a more formal resource intended for rabbis and educators to teach chapters of the book, and the other is a very informal book club style, some questions that would help spark discussion with your friends. Because the nature of the book is such that many of the questions that it would lead us to answer, there are textual references in the chapters, so there's quite a bit of material to turn to. And I also like to imagine that if you were to engage in such a format and get together once a month, every time invite one person over who is not quite as deeply engaged with Judaism as they might be, or seems to you to not have some grasp of some of the potential that Judaism might hold for their lives. And if you did that, 40 people, or if you invited a household or a family, then as many as 200 people would have a very rich and meaningful exposure to Judaism. And if you did this over a Shabbos dinner, for example, right, those people would have Shabbos and community and a real experience of Judaism that they can grasp and find for themselves. The other really fun way to engage with this book, either in its hardcover copy or just so we mention it's on Kindle and Nook, which is a very nice way to read it, is to just kind of thumb through the index, which has a remarkable number of interesting topics, and kind of work your way back from the index of the book. those would be a few of my suggestions for how I'd like to see it used. And the other thing I would like to add is there was an interesting, one of the many studies that our community does about itself. And last week's study said that there are as many as 1 million Jews who are seeking Judaism outside of institutions.
1 out of 6.
One out of 6. And, to be sure, people like us celebrate institutions because we feel such a great sense of gratitude to them and appreciation for what they can bring to people's lives. But undoubtedly, it is works like this that someone who hasn't found their way to feel comfortable in a Jewish institution, 1 in 6, and could be more than that, right, who could pick up this book and find a personal way of relating to it. And I want to add one more thing about what is so special about the book. And I think very special, I give a tremendous amount of credit to all of our authors who have been working on our publications over the last several years. Our Machzor Lev Shalem, in similar fashion, has a way of bringing very personal, intimate questions onto the page. So, for example, here I mentioned specifically Rabbi Kalmanovsky's very interesting, moving chapter about the lives of single people. And in our Machzor, the Yizkor prayer for a hurtful parent. Right? And what the conservative movement has been striving to do is to take all of those ways in which people sort of feel in their hearts, well, I'm not a good Jew, or Judaism isn't for me because, or I don't relate to this prayer, and take those people and put them right on the page. So you don't even have to go to the rabbi's office to find out if Judaism has something to say to your life experience, but to really bring people in. And so perhaps most important of all, Gary, for those 1 in 6 people, that they might find their way through some Google search to this book and find meaning here.
Right. So we only have about 5 minutes or so for this segment. And as has been noted, this book covers such a wide range of topics. I wanted to ask about one area that wasn't in the book, and that is in like the section about Israel. So much of Jewish life today, we're obsessed about our relationship, diaspora Jews' relationship with Israel. The approach was a different one. I just wondered if that was a conscious decision to sort of not deal with it, or
there is a long chapter about the halakha of Israel. It was written by myself.
Right.
It was.
I read it.
It is. The book was written from the vantage point of the diaspora,
Right.
and although some of the questions that I covered in the Israel chapter were traditional chapters, mitzvot that have to do with the land of Israel agriculturally, sabbatical, jubilee year, the real questions, the Temple Mount issues like that, the real question that I tried to highlight were the ones that are the most stress-inducing and the most painful. Is Aliyah a mitzvah? And to say that without flinching, to answer the question and to say, no, it's not, and that's why I live here, because I wish to live here, or to say that it is, and I am not doing that mitzvah, even though I could. I have the wherewithal. I live in a free country. I could move to Israel, but I've chosen to live here. That's the type of stress-inducing question that is also extremely healthy to force yourself to ask. One of the things that the hallmarks of the book that we tried always was not to hold back from asking even the most pointed questions, to ask about whether Jewish people in the diaspora, whether you and I have a responsibility, or the younger versions of ourselves have a responsibility to serve in the IDF, whether the halakha treats the day-to-day work of the Israel Defense Forces as coming clearly within the category of a milchemet mitzvah, of a war undertaken to preserve the lives of Jewish people in the land of Israel. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean that we have no responsibility? It seems peculiar to say that we have a responsibility to serve in the armed forces of another country. But the halakha places that question front and center, and if you can look away, but you could also, I guess one of the points of the book is to show you that you don't have to look away. You can look at the question, you can stare it down, you can try to find, and this is the truly stress-inducing part, you can try to find the wherewithal to answer it honestly, and to allow yourself to feel extremely ill at ease if the answer makes you, is anxiety-provoking. That type of thoughtful, ruminative reflection on the halakha and its intersection with daily life is exactly what the book is meant to be about. Similar questions appear in almost every chapter. Questions about how lawyers should behave in court, about how advertisers the extent to which advertisers can lie about their products without contravening the laws of the Lashon Hara, the degree to which doctors can feel free to follow the law of the land, even when they are in direct contradiction to what the halakha suggests is the ideal. The question of just to mention one chapter in specific, Larry Troster's fabulous chapter, the final chapter in our book about the environment, an area on which there is basically no foundation to build on, and yet which Rabbi Troster simply refused to simply fold up his tent and say, therefore we can do what we want, but to insist on finding the wherewithal within Jewish sources to grapple with these questions on which the future of our planet depends, and not to look away, and not to just sort of wave it off as as other people's source, and to attempt to say that an observant Jew has to have a stance on these things, has to feel engaged by these issues, has to feel personally responsible to live his life in accordance with the halakha as it is expressed in an area in which there's no halakha, or has hardly any. That's what we're trying to do in the book.
Right. Well, I have a number of more questions, but I think this is sort of the Vorspeise, if you will, of the evening, and I think the next segment, which will be very interactive and give you a chance to learn and to discuss, is coming up, and so I don't want to take away from that. So Julie is going to explain how this is going to work, and so I want to take this moment to thank the three of you for a very spirited and helpful discussion. Thank you.
And thank you, Gary, and to the Jewish Week for bringing us all together, and special thanks to my colleague Elliot Cosgrove and to Park Avenue Synagogue for giving us this really warm and lovely home in which to have this discussion. At this point, we will turn to the roundtable discussions, which will take place behind the curtain. There are 16 chapter authors in the greater New York area. They are all here this evening. So there are signs and some refreshments on each of the 4 tables. The first, legacy, grandparents and grandchildren, bequests, and the environment. A few lenses on the issue of legacy, with Rabbis Martin Cohen, our senior editor, Rabbi Jerry Skolnick, the president of the International RA, and Rabbi Larry Troster. Issues of secular law, crime and punishment, the legal system, repentance, and public behavior, with Rabbi David Lincoln, Rabbi Larry Siebert, Rabbi Abby Sosland, and Rabbi Gordon Tucker. Matters of family, marriage, parents and children, and issues of siblings, with Rabbis David Fine, David Greenstein, Jeremy Kalmanovsky, and Rabbi Danny Nevins. And finally, Jewish ritual, holidays, kashrut, Shabbat, Torah study, and synagogue life, with Rabbis Eliezer Diamond, Paul Drazen, our associate editor, Michael Katz, Alan Lucas, and Craig Sheff. The tables are all marked with signs. They are 4 sections in the rear ballroom. Please join us.